Now, this is fascinating from a journalistic perspective. I read your press release and I can paint a positive picture talking about the fact that you're upgrading growth forecasts, or I can paint a negative picture talking about what you think has been missed and what the priority should be and our falling down the rankings of the G7, etc. So are you trying to say something positive or negative about the UK today?
Well, there's a bit of both. So we have, you're right, we have upgraded our forecast for growth over the next few years, mainly on the back of slightly stronger consumer spending. We see the wage squeeze easing a little over the next year or so. We're seeing pay settlements, the heart rate pressure is increasing a little bit. But actually, the overall picture is that the UK economy is going to be locked onto a low growth path for the foreseeable future, which means we're going to be one of the weakest growing economies in the G7. It's a key concern. It's a key concern given that the wider global economy is going to be pretty strong in the next few years.
So the relative conversation is a bit disappointing. And one of the other points you make in your notes is the impact that the pound has had. Weaker pound, you might have thought, would drive up exports. There has been some talk of that. And, of course, we haven't left the EU yet, so there's still access to those markets. But this chart, 9452 on the Bloomberg, is interesting because this shows net trade in the red and the path of the pound. And you don't think we've seen as much of a positive impact on net trade from the weakness in the pound, which, incidentally, is now strengthening broadly. You don't think we've seen as much upside as you'd expect to?
No, the trade story is quite interesting because, on the one hand, you've seen exports perform quite strongly. Sterling has helped, but also the wider global economy and the improvement there has helped as well. But what we're also seeing is imports still growing at a strong rate. We're not seeing any import substitution really from consumers or businesses. But what that means is that UK's overall net trade position hasn't really improved that much over the last few years, and we're not expecting that to continue over the next few years. So actually, the contribution to growth is going to be quite limited.
Is it not going to pick up tremendously? I mean, Boris Johnson was on Andrew Marr's program on the BBC over the weekend, and he said, I'll just read the direct quote. He said, there will be an implementation period, but after we come out, we'll have a gigantic free trade with all sorts of bolt-ons. Is that really possible? And if so, Suren, shouldn't everybody leave the EU?
Well, when we speak to businesses, actually one of the key issues when looking to trade abroad is some of those practical questions. So it's not just access to markets and free trade agreements, it's actually having the right people in place. So skills is a big issue domestically, but also when businesses are looking to trade abroad as well, having the right people in place, having the right domestic environment, all these sort of things play into the overall position when businesses are looking to export. It's not just around free trade agreements, it's not just around weaker sterling, there's a wide range of issues that businesses have to look at when looking to trade abroad.
However, trade agreements are important. What kind of trade agreements do you expect? Because if the EU were to allow the UK to have such a sweet deal, have their cake and eat it too, to use a British phrase, wouldn't everybody else want to follow suit? Isn't it in the EU's best interest not to allow that kind of deal with the UK?
Well, we'll leave politics to those in Westminster and Brussels. But what businesses are looking for is a trade deal that means that they can continue to create jobs, continue to grow their business. Because what businesses, the key priority at the moment is maintaining existing access to key markets. What we're seeing at the moment is some of the key markets in the Euro area and US performing really strongly over the past year, and we expect that to continue going forward. And access to these key markets will be a massive driver to helping UK businesses grow.
So, just briefly, how important is it that we get a transition deal agreed this week?
It's important because what businesses are looking for is a swift agreement to a transition deal.
Would next week be too late, though? Is it this week or bust?
As soon as possible, I think, is a clear answer from businesses. But what we need is a transition period that closely mirrors existing trading conditions. Okay. So that will give them near-term certainty to help businesses grow and expand.